Hi and welcome to Pep Talk with me, Mr. Pepperell. Today we're looking at a microbiological technique and we're going to find out how to prepare a streak plate. So by the end of this video you should be able to tell me what a streak plate is and how to prepare one. So in order to set up my workspace, the first thing I'm going to do is introduce to my area a lit Bunsen burner. Now normally we use a Bunsen burner for heating, but that's not what we're using it today. The fact that I've got the Bunsen burner on is obviously warming up the air around it. I can feel the heat from that there. This is setting up, you remember from your physics, a convection current. The air around the Bunsen burner is warming up, it's getting less dense, and therefore it is starting to rise up. And what that is doing is creating an updraft over the area I am working in. And that means any bugs or microbes or viruses or fungi that might be floating about in the air will float over into my area, get caught in this updraft, and therefore get carried away from the area in which we are going to work. So this creating an updraft is a way of preventing contamination from settling down onto the work surface that I'm using, and therefore it's going to prevent my area from getting contaminated by any bugs or microbes that might be in the air. So the first thing we need is a Bunsen burner. Second thing I need is a source of microbes, and this is what I've got here in my nutrient broth. Now although you can't see them because they're so small, we have got in here in this nutrient broth, which is just a broth that contains all the sugars and amino acids and the minerals that my bacteria need to grow. We've introduced some bacteria into that broth. We've then incubated it at 25 degrees for 48 hours, giving those time for the bacteria to multiply. And now there are actually, although you can't even see them in there, there are thousands of bacteria in my nutrient broth, and that's what I'm going to use to prepare my streak plate with. So I've got my Bunsen burner, I have got my nutrient broth there. The next thing I'm going to use is this thing, this wire loop, which is a loop made out of very thin piece of nichrome wire, which is very unreactive. Doesn't matter if you get it hot, it's not going to react with anything in the air. And this is what we're going to use to introduce the bacteria from my broth that I've got just here onto my plate. So it's a little inoculating loop. Inoculate means to introduce the bacteria to the plate. So an inoculating loop is the next thing I'm going to use. And the final piece of kit that I need for this is also my Petri dish, which has already got, you can see in there, the yellow bit is the pre-poured agar or agarose gel. Now that's just like jelly you would have, jelly and ice cream type jelly. You probably wouldn't want to eat it though. It's actually made out of seaweed. And what that does, it provides a medium for the bacteria to grow onto. That again contains the sugars and amino acids and all the different nutrients that the bacteria need to actually grow. So don't need much kit there. I've got my Bunsen burner, I've got my broth, which contains my bacteria. I've got my inoculating loop, and I've got my Petri dish, which now contains agar, so that's now an agar plate. So I'm going to take us through the procedure of how we'd actually prepare a spread plate. Now the first thing I need to do is to make sure that my inoculating loop hasn't already got loads of different microbes and bacteria and stuff all over it. So this is another use of my Bunsen burner. I'm going to switch from the orange to the blue flame, so you might not be able to see that as well, but it's still there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to heat up this loop to kill off any bugs that might already be on it. And I'm going to do this in a very particular way. So I'm going to ping this over here a little bit closer. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to introduce my loop into that flame there, but I'm not just going to poke it into it. I'm actually going to lean it so it's pointing down into the flame. And what this means is that any bugs that are on it will be driven up along the wire. The heat will move along the wire and chase them. If I was to do it that way up, what could happen is any little bits of moisture could rise up the wire and spit off the end and contaminate the area. So what I want to do is I want to hold it that way up, so any moisture is driven up the wire and is any bugs that are in it gets killed by the heat. Now you can hopefully see now that is glowing really hot. So this gets really, really hot. It is now what we call sterile. There are no living things on there. That's not going to introduce anything to my plate. If I was to touch it now, it's going to burn me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that and I'm going to rest it down on the hose of my Bunsen burner there, and you can see that's not touching the table. It's underneath my updraft, so it's now nice and sterile. I now want to get the bacteria from my broth. Okay, now the bugs are in here, but because I'm touching this and there are bugs on my skin, normal stuff, that's not a problem that it's on there. Doesn't mean I've got dirty hands or anything, but there are microbes that live on my skin, and now all over the top of this bottle. So what I want to do is get those bugs out of there without contaminating my sample with bugs off my own hand. So I'm going to do this really carefully here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the bottle, hold the lid between my finger, my little finger, and that hand there, and then I am free to undo the bottle and take the lid off while it's still in my hand without having to take it off and put it down on the table, because if there are bugs in there, I would then put them onto the table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this technique. I'm going to unscrew the top. I'm going to take the top off. Now I can still use this hand for other stuff, and it can still do stuff, but the top I'm not putting it down, I'm not contaminating stuff, and I'm going to flame the top of that bottle there. Now that has now killed off any bugs that were on there. This is called aseptic technique. It's making sure that you're not passing contamination from one stage of procedure to another one. Okay, so by putting that in the top of there and just flaming the top of that, the glass is getting slightly hot now, but any bugs that were on it are now killed off. Okay, so I've now got my hand free still, the lid's in my hand, yeah, but I've still got this hand free to do stuff. So what I can do is I can pick up my loop again, I can flame my loop again just to make sure that's nice and clean. I can flame the neck of my thing, and now I can now work with this without having to put anything down. I've got it all in my hands at the same time. I can dip this in here, I can get some bacteria, I can do what I want with them, but I haven't put anything down and contaminated my work area. So all I want to do is, before I put anything down, I just inoculate my loop, make sure that's nice and clean. I can put that down there. Before I put it down, I'm going to kill any bugs that might be on my bottle. I've then got the lid in my hand, I can screw that back on there, and that's all good. So that's a way that I can get bugs in and out of the bottle without contaminating anything else. Next thing I want to do is actually get them onto my agar plate. So now I know how to work aseptically, I'm ready to inoculate or put the bacteria onto my plate, ready to get them growing. So what I'm going to do is take up my loop again, but of course it's been sat there for a while, it might have picked up some bugs and whatnot, so I am going to give it a little flame there to sterilise it. I've got my culture, I'm going to remove the lid with my little finger there, so I've still got this in my hand, flame the top, there's no bugs in there. I'm then going to dip my loop into my bugs, and on there now I have quick flame, put this one away, that's used, I don't need that anymore. But on my loop now, and you probably can't see it, but there is a tiny droplet of my right there. I'm not quite focusing because it's too small a thing, but there is a little tiny drip of the broth in there now. And what I'm going to do is making sure I keep my petri dish of agar close to my flame, so I've got the updraft there. I'm going to, with the lid down on the table, I am going to pick up my petri dish, so I've got the side with the jelly in my hand, but it's upside down. I'm going to turn it over next to the Bunsen burner, and I'm going to introduce that little spot of bacteria onto my plate. And what I'm doing is I'm just drawing a tiny little circle. You probably can't even see it on there, you can just see it in the light there, look. A little circle about the size of two 20p's next to each other. So a little oblong, not a circle, a little oblong there, the size of two 20p's. If I just get it in the light, you should be able to see that. Hopefully you can see that on there, we go, look, you can see that on there. About the size of two 20p's on there. I have now got bacteria on my plate. I'm going to put it back down again. It's sealed up, it's inside the petri dish. Before I put my loop down, I'm going to give it a quick flame to kill off any bacteria that might be left on there. That's now clean, that's now sterile. Put that down, and I have inoculated my plate. There are now bacteria on there, but we haven't yet streaked them out. So what we're going to do now is go through the procedure of streaking those bacteria out on the plate. So now I've inoculated my plate. I've got my little inoculum on here, the size of two 20p pieces. We can just about see it there, look, and in the sun, in the lights rather. The size of two 20p pieces. But if I just incubated that in my incubator now, the problem is going to be that that plate will grow, the bacteria will just grow in a big like slimy lump there. I won't be able to see which type of bacteria I've got, how many there are, so we're going to use a streak plate to spread them out and hopefully give us individual colonies that we can use to actually investigate those bacteria. So first thing I'm going to do is, firstly, I am going to, you can just see this here again, I'm going to flame my loop first of all to make sure that's really hot, look, it's cooling down, and that's killing off any microbes that might already be on there. So that's nice and cool. Now, if I now stuck that red hot loop onto my microbes, that's just going to kill them all. So I'm going to give it a little second to cool down, but what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to touch it on the very edge. Oops, I'll tell you what, if I do it again and put it closer, you should be able to hear this happen. If I just touch it on really lightly, I don't know if you could just hear that little sizzle then when it touched it. That was my loop actually cooling down. You can see I've burnt a little hole there. But what I actually want to do is I want to cool my loop down. nice and cool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my loop and I am going to streak it through that 220p sized inoculum that I made and drag the bacteria across the plate in this direction. So I'm dragging across, I'm lifting it up, and I'm dragging it across, I'm lifting it up, I'm dragging it across, and I'm lifting it up, I'm dragging it across. So I'm dragging them only in this direction across the plate. Then I'm going to quickly flame my loop, kill off any microbes, put it down there. So what I've done now is I've taken my big blob of microbes and I've spread them out, I've streaked them in this direction, hopefully spreading them out, thinning them out a bit as they go in this direction, but it might be the case that they are still too thick here. So now what I'm going to do is take my plate again, I'm going to take this, and I don't know if you can actually see these streaks on here or not, but I'll draw it again afterwards and you'll be able to see it. I'm going to cool my loop down, making sure I don't burn my bacteria. Then I'm going to streak it across the end of my previous stripes, going in this direction, across and up, across and up, across and up, dragging them and thinning them out even more. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to flame my loop again. I'm going to turn it round. So then I'm going to cool my loop down. And I'm going to go drag from the end of my last lot of stripes off, drag and off, drag and off, drag and off. All the time what I'm doing is I am thinning out my bacteria. One last flame, one last cool down, and then just to make last sure, I'm going to go a little squiggle like that across my plate. So what I'm going to do now is, after I flame that, I'm hopefully going to put this in a position where, there we go, you can see those stripes. So we started, look where the light is. Started there, we streaked them in this direction, we streaked them down in that direction, we streaked them back, and then I've got a last little squiggle in the middle. So we can see there that I've now prepared my streak plate, and hopefully I've thinned out my bacteria so I can actually investigate some individual colonies. So just to re-emphasise what I'm doing, I'm making a inoculum of bacteria on my plate here about the size of 220p's next to each other. I'm flaming my loop and then I'm dragging my loop through the inoculum in one direction only, picking it up and bringing it back to the start, dragging it through, and this is dragging my thick clump of bacteria across the plate. I then give my loop a quick flame, and then what I do is I streak again at almost right angles down through the streaks I've already made, picking up and going back to the start each time to thin them out even more. Flame my loop one more time, then do another set of streaks at almost right angles across the plate, flame the loop one more time afterwards, and then do a little tiny squiggle just back through the last three streaks to get any bacteria that remain off my loop. And then, like I said, the last thing we do is we put my plate that we can see there in the corner in an incubator at 25 degrees C for 48 hours before we look at the growth. And that is how we carry out the microbiological technique of streak plating using aseptic technique. Any questions about that, don't hesitate to tweet me or email me and I'll get back to you ASAP. Thanks for stopping by.